So in this video, we are going to look at how do we use graphing, that skill of graphing a quadratic equation in order to solve it. So this whole time we've been looking at characteristics of quadratic equations, vertex, line of symmetry, what else? Max, min, and then all the translations, right? The purpose is to really get an idea of, by looking at an equation, what is it going to look like on the graph? And then being able to obviously accurately graph that to solve it. So we already really know how to graph quadratic equations. We start with a line of symmetry. That'll be our first step. And then we find the vertex. Then we'll find our y-intercept, reflect, and then we'll sketch it. So let's try A together. So for A, I'm going to start with my line of symmetry. So if you want to say step 1, line of symmetry, remember it's opposite of B all over 2A. So I'm going to plug in my values. That's 2 all over 2 times A, which is 1. So that's just 2 over 2, or that is a line of symmetry at, whoops, I was going to put X, at 1. So remember that it's X equals 1. And so I'll go to my graph, and it's an invisible line, and I'll kind of put like a dotted line here. So I know my vertex is going to lie on that. So now step 2 is I'm going to find my vertex. So I'm going to plug in 1 for X, and then I'm going to simplify. So this becomes 1 minus 2 minus 8, which is simply negative 1 minus 8, which is negative 9. And so my vertex lies on 1, negative 9. So I'll find 1, negative 9. Here is my vertex. So I do know that my y-intercept, that's pretty simple, is negative 8. So we'll find negative 8. Put a point there, and I can easily reflect that over here. So when I'm reflecting, I'm just counting, okay, it's 1 space, so that negative 8 is 1 to the left of the line of symmetry. I'm going to go 1 to the right. So now my dilemma is, so like I find my answer, my solution to a quadratic equation by where the line crosses the x-axis. Okay, so obviously I'm not quite there yet, but maybe it'll cross when x is negative 1. And so what I'll do is then I'll plug in negative 1 in for x. So over here I'll put negative 1 squared minus 2 times negative 1 minus 8 is equal to 0. So that becomes 1 plus 2 minus 8, or 3 minus 8. Oops, I was one step ahead of myself, which is negative 5. So that's the point 1, negative 5. So I'm getting closer. I'm accurately getting closer to my x-axis. Whoops. Oh my goodness, where did it all go? Sorry. So 1, negative 5. Here we go. But I'm obviously not at the x-axis just yet. So now let's try negative 2. So I'll plug in negative 2 and I'll square that. Minus 2 times negative 2. And this gives me 4 plus 4 minus 8 is equal to 0, or 8 minus 8. Oops, sorry, I didn't really mean to write equals 0 because I know it equals 0, sorry. So when I plugged in negative 2, I know I get out 0. So then on my graph, I'm going to plot negative 2, 0. And now these 2 points that I plotted, I'm going to also reflect them. Okay, and so this is how I accurately can sketch my graph. And so I see where my graph has hit the x-axis. That's my solution. So my answer is negative 2, 0, but then also 4, 0. Okay, so now let's look at example B. Same idea. We're going to start with our line of symmetry. So opposite of B all over 2A. So that's going to be negative 4 all over 2 times my A value. So this is just negative 4 over negative 2, so that's just come out as 2. So that's my line of symmetry. X is equal to 2. So on my graph, I'm going to draw my dotted invisible line of symmetry. Now I'm going to find my axis, my vertex. So now I'll put negative. Now I'm plugging in 2, come on pen, squared plus 4 times 2 minus 4. So this is negative 4. Plus 8 minus 4. So let's see, negative 4 plus 8, that's 4 minus 4. Oh, I get out 0. So when I plugged in 2, I got out 0, and so there's my vertex. Oh, come on, pen. There's my vertex, and I know my y-intercept is -4 because that's my c value, and I can reflect that. And what's super convenient about this one is I don't need to plug in any extra points to see where the line is going to cross the x-axis because my vertex is on the x-axis, and so my answer is 2, 0. And then our final example here, so again, I'm going to start with that line of symmetry, opposite of B, all over 2A, so that's going to be +3. Oh, come on. Sorry, my pen's not working. +3 all over 2 times 2. So I am going to have 3/4 as my line of symmetry. I know that's super inconvenient because it's not a whole number. That's okay. We're going to estimate here. So I'm going to put my dotted line, not quite on 1, but very close to it because it's 0.075, or 0.75. And now I have to find my vertex, and so I'll do 2 times 3/4 x squared, or no, x, sorry, 2 3/4 squared minus 3 times 3/4 plus 5, and I'm going to simplify. So I know that this is going to be 2 and then times 9 over 16 minus 9 over 4 plus 5. And then I'll go ahead and I'll keep simplifying. So I know that 2 times 9 16ths is going to be 18 over 16. And I'm going to act like I don't have a calculator, and I'm going to get common denominators in order to subtract. So 18 over 16 is going to stay the same, but to change the 9/4 to 6 denominator 16, I just have to multiply it by 4, so that becomes 36 over 16. And so when I add all of that together, I will get 3 and 14 over 16. And now you can just plug all that into your calculator, but make sure that you're not losing any accuracy there. So I would say that my vertex is on, 3/4 and 3 and 14 over 16. So we're just going to estimate where that is. So let's see, that'll be about right there. Here's my vertex. And I know my line of symmetry, or I'm sorry, my y-intercept is at 5 because that's my c value. And I'll reflect that, so it's about over here somewhere. Now if you notice, my parabola, it's facing upwards. That means it's never going to cross the x-axis. And when that's the case, we call this a no solution. Because if I find my solution where it crosses the x-axis and it doesn't, well, it would only make sense that I have no solution. So there's 3 outcomes. We can have 2 solutions. We could have 1, so that means my vertex lies on the axis of, my x-axis. And then my other option is no solution because it's never going to cross. So why don't you try these 3 on your own? So then in number 1, you would find your line of symmetry. So opposite of B, all over 2A. So that's -7 over 2. Now we could change this to just -3.5. But you're not going to lose any accuracy there. And so on my graph, -3.5 is approximately, let's see, 1, 2, 3.5. Oh, I realize I'm off a little bit. Let's try that again. It's about right. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Okay, so here's my line of symmetry. Now I'll plug that in to find my vertex. So -3.5 squared plus 7 times -3.5 plus 14. So this is going to simplify down to 12.25 minus 24.5 plus 4. And so when I plug it all into my calculator, I get 1.75. And so that's where my vertex is, -3.5, 1.75. Okay, so 1.75 is about, let's see, I gotta zoom up on my graph here. It's about right here. Okay, and I know my y-intercept's all the way up at 14. So 14 is about right there. So immediately, without even having to finish the rest of this, I know that I'm going to reflect my y-intercept, and it's going to look like that. So clearly I'm not going to ever cross the x-axis, and so we would say no solution for the first one. So for number 2, we would start with, first, let's get this into standard form. So that means I have to move everything over so that my equation equals 0. So now I would do the opposite of b all over 2a, which is just 2 over 2, or I have a line of symmetry of 1. So then I'm going to go over to my graph, and I'll put my little invisible line of symmetry in. And now I can find my vertex. So I would do 1 squared minus 2 times 1 plus 1, which simplifies to 1 minus 2 plus 1, or that's going to be 0. So my vertex is on the point 1, 0. And so I'll plot that right here. I know my y-intercept's at -1, and I can reflect that, and I see that it's going to open downward, and I don't even have to do any more work because I see my vertex is on the x-axis, so that is my solution. So x would be 1. And then the third example, or third practice problem, so again, let's get this into standard form. I'd subtract 3x over, and I would do opposite of b all over 2 times my a value. So this would be 3 over 6, or 0.5, or 1/2. Either one. They both work. So now I can pull up my line of symmetry, and I'm going to substitute in 1/2 for x. You could also do a decimal, doesn't matter. Now 1/2 squared is 1/4. Times 3 is 3/4, minus 3 over 2 minus 6. And so when I simplify all of that, that's going to give me -6 3/4. So that's where my vertex is. So let's see, got to make sure I do this correctly. Find my -6 3/4, which is about right here on my graph. I know that my y-intercept is 1, or -1. And I can reflect that. Now I'm going to also plug in -1 because I can't tell exactly where this is going to cross the x-axis. So I'll plug in -1 as well. So I'll do 3 -1 squared minus 3 times -1 minus 6. So this is going to be 3 plus 3 minus 6. Ooh, so that's going to be 0. So then I just found where it's going to cross the x-axis, which is at -1 and 0. And then I can also go ahead and reflect that. Let's see, that would be somewhere over here. Whoa, I keep doing that. Oh man, lost my spot. There we go. And we'll reflect it over here. And so my answer would be x equals -1 for sure, but also now we reflected it over, let's see, 1.5, right? Because my line of symmetry is at 1/2, so if I go 1 over from 0.5, that would be 1.5 and a half. Ooh, I was a little off, that would be 2. Okay, and so my answer would also be 2.